Hello friends, welcome to Byju's classes. In today's session, we are going to discuss about sampling. So we first understand what is the meaning of the term sampling, what are the principles involved when it comes to sampling, what are the advantages of sampling, and also we will look at different methods, different sampling methods, and that is what is very important for us. So all these things we will take up. The methods will take some more time as compared to the other part. We will have to focus on the methods. We need to understand how the different methods are different from one another. So this is what we are going to cover: the meaning of sampling, the purpose of sampling, the advantages of sampling, what are the different methods, and also we'll look at some of the challenges that we might face. What can be some of the biases, what can be sampling error, those things we'll see. So we'll start with the topic. What is sampling? What is the definition of sampling? Now sampling means you are creating a sample. What is a sample? Sample is a part of a population, the population which has to be studied. And the sample is such that from the sample itself, we can make inferences about the whole population. If there is a population, we need to study the population. But for studying the population, you cannot go to each and every individual and collect data. What you can either do is you can create a sample. You can select some individuals from the entire population. Those individuals will form the sample, you study that sample. So sample is basically that part, that unit from which you can make inferences about the entire population. There is some sort of representation here. So understand sampling. So what is a sample? The process of creating sample is referred to as the sampling methods. There are different methods by which you can create samples, which we are going to discuss in detail. Now when you are creating samples, what is your aim here? What is the purpose here? Why are you creating samples? What is the main aim of sampling? Scientifically talks about the purposes of sampling, purposes of creating samples. First thing, population can be large. Studying each and every individual component of the population might not be easy. Apart from this, the population can be scattered. The geography, across geography can be scattered. You cannot go to each and every individual and get data. Even if you are able to get it, it will be very expensive. So going for a complete coverage is not possible. Even if it is possible, it will be very difficult. It will be time consuming, it will be resource consuming. So in that scenario, the next best alternative is going for samples. Next thing, samples, they can also provide you high degree of accuracy. Small number of people are involved. You have to study a small number of people. So accuracy can also be good. You can carry out your research in a shorter period of time as compared to the scenario in which you are going to study the entire population. Less demanding when it comes to efforts, less amount of effort will be required. It is economical. You also save money. Studying the entire population might be difficult. Studying the sample might be comparatively easier. Also, sometimes some research, not necessarily social research, some kind of research, they require destruction of items once the test has been carried out, or destruction of item might be required as part of the test process. So in that case, you cannot go on destroying the entire population. You will destroy certain sample units. For example, let's say tube lights have been manufactured, and you need to test the durability of the tube lights. Now, in this scenario, you cannot test each and every tube light that you have manufactured, or else when you are bringing them to the market, they are all used. So you will use some tube lights that has been manufactured, and then if you have tested them, let's say you are testing the durability of the tube lights, how long they are lasting. So once you have used them, you will throw it back. So in those kind of scenario also, sampling is more relevant. You cannot do a test for the entire population. So these are the purposes of sampling. Now, scientific also mentions certain principles involved in the method of sampling. What are the principles that need to be followed? First thing, sample units, they need to be chosen in a systematic, objective manner. What is the reason why you are going for this method? What is the reason why you are selecting these particular units as part of your sample? So certain rules, regulations you need to follow, and you need to be able to explain why you have used these particular methods. Sample units need to be clearly defined. They should be easily identifiable. There should be a mechanism by which you are able to define the sample units. The sample units must be independent of each other. There should not be any dependency. Same units of sample should be used throughout the study. You use one particular sample for some part of the study, for the remaining part of the study, you cannot use another sample. The same sample that you have taken, you have to study the same sample throughout the study. Selection process should be on the basis of sound criteria. You need to ensure that errors, bias, distortions, they are all minimized. So when you are choosing a sample, there are chances that there will be some biases can creep in, but your aim should be to reduce the bias as much as possible. So these are the principles which need to be followed. Your sample units need to be, the way you are choosing sample units, there should be some particular method. You need to follow certain rules, regulations. It should be systematic. It should be clearly defined how you have chosen your sample units. The sample units must be independent of one another. There should not be any dependency between different sample units. And whatever sample units you are choosing throughout the study, same sample unit has to be used. Ensure that the different errors, biases which can possibly creep in, all these things should be minimized. What are the advantages of using sampling? So the purpose of sampling, why you are going for sampling methods, and advantages, they will be more or less same. For example, you can study a large population. You can study a population scattered over a large geographical area using these methods. You are saving on time, you are saving on money, you are saving on efforts. You are saving destruction of units. Those kind of research, those kind of experiments which require destruction of whatever you have studied. Data accuracy will be high. The response rate will also be high. If you are trying to study the entire population, the response rate will not be that high. But here, you just take one sample. So you are basically focusing your energy on a limited number of respondents. So response rate is definitely going to be better. Better cooperation can be there from respondents. It is easy to supervise few interviewers. If you are going for a pan-India survey, there will be so many interviewers, it will be difficult to supervise. If you are focusing on a sample, this thing can be easier. Also, the researcher can maintain a low profile in these methods. So these are the advantages of sampling. Now, when you are going for sampling, there are chances that there can be some sort of error in that. So those errors are referred to as sampling error. What is the meaning of sampling error? If there is a difference between the total population and the sampling values, whatever value you are getting from the total population, the entire population, and whatever values you get from the sample, if there is any difference, then it is referred to as sampling error. Difference between total population values and sampling values is called as sampling error. So the sample characteristics and characteristics of the total population, if there is variation in that, it is called sampling error. So indirectly sampling error, if sampling error is less, that means the sample is more representative of the entire population. If sampling error is more, that means whatever sample you have taken, it is not that representative of the total population. So we need to minimize the sampling error so that our sample is more or less reflective of the entire population. So lesser the sampling error, greater is the precision. But one thing has to be noted: the degree of representativeness of a sample is dependent on sampling error for sure. If you reduce the sampling error, it is more representative. But there is another factor as well. That factor is the non-sampling error. A perfect representative sample depends on both these things. It is dependent on the amount of sampling error. If more sampling error is there, representativeness will be less. If more non-sampling error is there, then also representativeness is less. Now, what is non-sampling error? See, non-sampling error, it refers to the errors because of the study design, because of execution of your social research. So if there is issues when it comes to execution, if there is issues with the study design, there will be an error. And if that error is there, then also you are not having a perfectly representative sample. Sampling error, it is more dependent on the sample size. What is the size of the sample? So both sampling error and non-sampling error, if both of them are minimized, then you are going to have a perfectly representative sample. So this is about sampling, purposes of sampling, advantages of sampling, and sampling error. Now what we will do is we'll understand different type of sampling methods, the types of sampling. Now sampling methods again can be divided into two types. probability sampling, non-probability sampling. Probability sampling can be further divided into different types: simple random sampling, stratified random sampling, systematic sampling, cluster sampling, multi-phase sampling, multi-phase sampling. Non-probability sampling can be again divided into different types: convenience sampling, purposive sampling, quota sampling, snowball sampling, volunteer sampling. So we will discuss all these methods one by one. But first thing here, what is the difference between probability sampling and non-probability sampling? In probability sampling, every unit of the population has equal probability of being selected for the sampling. Any member, any unit of the entire population has equal chance of being selected. So that is probability sampling. Non-probability sampling, every unit does not have equal chances. So this thing you keep in mind. In probability sampling, there is equal probability, equal chance of each unit getting selected. Non-probability sampling, this is not there. So in probability sampling, there is higher degree of representativeness. But at the same time, since each and every unit has equal chance of getting selected, there is some cost involved here as well. So it is an expensive method, it is a more time-consuming method, and it is also more complicated method. In non-probability sampling, representativeness might not be that good. A lot of the time, it is the researcher who has some discretion how sample units need to be chosen. So as we discuss the different methods in detail, you understand how each and every element is having equal probability. So we'll discuss all these methods. What are the different types of probability sampling methods? What are the different types of non-probability sampling methods one by one. So first we will take up probability sampling methods. But one thing before we go into probability sampling methods, individual probability sampling methods, one thing you should keep in mind: what is the scenario under which we go for probability sampling? What is the scenario? What is that scenario? Probability sampling is taken up when you are aware of the complete list of subjects that needs to be studied, when you know the size of the universe, when you are also aware of the desired sample size. So if the desired sample size is specified, you have the list of the subjects that you have the size of the entire universe of the population. So you need to have details about your population, then you can go for probability sampling. So these are the conditions under which probability sampling methods are used. Keep this in mind. So now we will start with each and every sampling method, probability sampling method. First thing, simple random sampling. What is simple random sampling? Now in simple random sampling, any element can be chosen. For example, there can be lottery method. You just choose any particular item from your population. You can choose it using lottery method. You can be blindfolded and you can randomly start picking things. So any element can be chosen from your population. So that method is called simple random sampling. You are not thinking anything, just you pick up elements, how many elements you require. What is the advantage and disadvantage of this method? Now in this method, all elements have equal chance of being selected. Randomly you are picking things from your population. It is the simplest of method. You do not have to use any brain, nothing. Just you have to randomly pick things. Sometimes it is used in conjunction with other methods. You use these things, then you can go for some other methods. It requires minimum knowledge of your population. Chances of sampling error is also quite less here. You might have seen the statistical textbooks. Some of you might have studied engineering in specifically in certain topics like thermodynamics and all. You would have come across statistical tables. So using those statistical tables also, we can draw random samples. So these are the advantages. Quite simple method, but it also has its own limitations. For example, if you are having some knowledge of the population that you have at present, you're not using the knowledge of the population. So what is the advantage of having the knowledge of the population? For example, you know that this particular population consists of people from this particular sections. Now you are not utilizing that particular knowledge, so that knowledge is basically going waste. Now this method can have more sampling errors as compared to other methods. There are some other methods which have even lesser sampling errors. So it is not the best method when it comes to sampling errors. And again, you cannot use this method if you want to study subgroups in a population. There can be different sections of the population, and if you want to make it more representative, if you want to make your sample more representative, you should have representation from different subgroups. But since you are picking up your sample randomly, so you will not get idea about these subgroups. So those kind of details will not be studied here. Next method that we are going to understand is stratified random sampling. Now what is happening here? Now how do we carry out stratified random sampling? Now in this method, the entire population is divided into a number of subgroups or strata. For example, a particular population can be divided into subgroups on the basis of age. Those who are below the age of 18, they might form one strata. Those who are in between the age category 18 to 59, they can form one strata. Those who are above the age of 60 or equal to the age of 60, they will form another strata. So you are basically dividing the population into strata, and then you are selecting elements from each of the strata. So sample is drawn from each of the strata. So there is greater representativeness. Divisions can be along these lines, any like sex, age, class, educational level, where are you staying, what is your residential background, what is your family type, what is your religion. So on that basis, you can divide the population, and from this population you can select your sample. Now stratified random sampling can also be of two types. It can be proportionate, it can be disproportionate. What happens in a proportionate stratified random sampling? Here, the sample unit that you are choosing, it is proportionate to its size in the population. Disproportionate sampling, sample unit is not related to its size in the population. For example, let's say this is the population, and let's say it has 60 males and 40 females. This is the entire population. Now we have two strata on the basis of sex, male and female. 60 male and 40 females are there. Now let's say we have to create one sample here. Here the population is 100. Let's say we create a sample of 10. Now in a proportionate stratified random sample, here the number of males and the number of males in the entire population, they will be related. 6, 6. 4 females, here also it will be 4 females. So in a proportionate random stratified sample, it will be like this. In disproportionate, it will not be like that. Disproportionate, the number of males and females might vary. So this is the meaning of stratified random sampling. On the screen, you can see two illustrations. From the two illustrations, can you please think, what does the first illustration, the illustration on the left hand side, denote? What kind of illustration, what kind of sampling the right hand illustration denotes? Left hand side, just look at it. So here, there are around 12 members in the population, and finally we are having around 4 members in the sample. So here you can see that we have not used any particular criteria here to select the sample. It is a simple random sampling method that we have used. So 2 has been selected, 5 has been selected, 8 has been selected, 10 has been selected. What's the criteria here? But look at the right hand side. Here what we have. So we have created a strata here. 2, 4, 6, 7, 8, 11. They are different in color, black in color. 1, 10, 12, 3, 5, 9. They are also different in color. 1, 10, 12, they're white in color. 3, 5, 9, they're grey in color. So the population of the white elements, that is 3 out of 12, 1/4. So in the sample also, the representation is 1 out of 4. The grey population, they are also 1/4 of the entire population, 3 out of 12. So here also, they are 1 out of 4. The black one, they are 6 out of 12. That means half. So 2 members out of 4 are black. So it is a stratified sampling, and it is also a proportionate stratified random sampling. So you are selecting from each strata, from white, from black, from grey, you have selected elements. So you have first divided the population into strata. From each of the strata you have made the selection, and what you have selected, the ratio is also consistent. So it is proportionate. So this illustration helps us understand the difference between simple random sampling and stratified random sampling. Now, what are the advantages of stratified random sampling and what are the limitations? Stratified random sampling, it ensures the representation of various groups and patterns and characteristics of the entire population. Can be used to compare categories, one category with another. White can be compared with black, black can be compared with grey. So those kind of comparisons there. In simple, it might so happen that you have selected in such a manner that you get all the blacks, or it might so happen that you select a sample in which you get all the grey. So those things are also possible. For example, if I'm going for creating a sample of 3 units, it might so happen that coincidentally I select all these 3 grey elements. So you will not have representation of black, or you will not have representation of white. So you cannot compare different subgroups in that manner. Stratified sampling is more precise as compared to simple random sampling. But it also has some limitations. It requires more efforts. You need to classify things into categories. So that will also require some efforts on what basis you are classifying and again selecting from each of these categories. So it might not be as simple as simple random sampling. And also one thing has to be kept in mind, you need to go for a large sample size. If small sample size is there, again the diversity will not be reflected. For example, in this case, so here you are having 3 different categories of group. But if you had let's say taken a sample of 2 elements, then definitely one element, one strata would not have been reflected. At the max, 2 strata would have been reflected. Since we have taken 4 as the sample size, we are getting the reflection of all the strata. So sample size needs to be larger. So sample size needs to be larger so that we will get a meaningful result. What are the advantages of proportionate sampling method? The representation is even better. Sampling error will be less. You can compare different strata. So comparison between different strata is better in this case. Disadvantage, again, it will be more complex. Samples have to be chosen as per the proportion, so it is becoming more complex. It will be more time consuming. How are we going to classify things? That can sometimes lead to error on what basis the classification is taking place. So new kind of errors can also crop up in these methods. Next kind of sampling is systematic sampling. What happens in case of systematic sampling? In systematic sampling, we draw nth person from a predetermined list of persons. So there's a population. So you keep on selecting the nth element over there. For example, this illustration. Here it has been decided that from the first person, after the first person, every third person will be selected. So you selected the second person. Now onwards, you will select every third person. So 5th person is selected, then 8th person is selected, then 11th person is selected. 2 plus 3 is 5, 5 plus 3 is 8, 8 plus 3 is 11. That way you are creating a sample. First person will decide, and then nth person after the first item that you have chosen will be selected to form the sample. Now, how this method is different from a simple random sampling method? In simple random sampling method, whenever you are selecting an individual, that selection is not dependent on the previous unit. But here it is dependent on the previous unit. 5th selection is dependent on second unit. How come you are selecting 5th unit? Only because you have chosen second unit. Why you are choosing 8th unit? Because you have chosen 5th unit. So there is a dependency here. That dependence is not there in simple random. The second unit could have been chosen next. The next unit could have been the 9th unit, or it could have been 4th unit. Any unit has equal probability of getting selected. So depending on the first choice, all the units will be selected in case of systematic sampling. If the first choice had been 1, your sample would have reflected 1, 4, 7, 10. If the first choice would have been 3, your sample would have reflected 3, 6, 9, 12. So depending on the first unit, all the units are becoming part of the sample. Now, what is the advantage of using systematic sampling? So this is also a very easy method, simple method, and again it is not a time-consuming method, rapid method. What can be the disadvantage? You're basically ignoring all the persons, all the elements between 2 and numbers. So sometimes overrepresentation, underrepresentation can take place. It's not completely random here. So overrepresentation and underrepresentation can happen. You are only choosing those elements which are the nth elements. In between ones are out. So this illustration, keep in mind. Now, another type of sampling is cluster sampling. Now, what happens in a cluster sampling method? Now, here the entire population is divided into clusters, and then random samples are drawn from clusters or from selected clusters. For example, the entire country here on the illustration you can see the entire country of the United States of America. Now, here they have divided it into different clusters. What are the clusters here? They are divided into different states. Then they are divided it into cities, towns, counties. So they are selecting some of these states, which is again further divided into towns, cities, and counties. Now, from here, they are randomly selecting some schools from each of these cities, towns, and again from these schools they are randomly selecting students. So randomly selected students are selected from each of these schools. So this is cluster sampling method. In the first stage, the clusters that are formed, they are called the primary sampling units. In the second stage, whatever clusters are being formed, for example, these cities, towns, counties, they are the secondary sampling unit. Next stage onwards, they are referred to as the multi-stage sampling units. Now, it depends on the researcher whether he wants to take all the students, at least 2 students or 3 students from each of these clusters, or the researcher might decide few clusters. From those clusters, can take the students and study them. So this is called cluster sampling method. Now, you might have a question. What is the difference between a cluster sampling method and stratified sampling method? We just saw stratified sampling method, right? What is the difference there? In a stratified sampling method, within a particular subgroup, there is homogeneity. For example, if you have divided it on the basis of age. So on the basis of sex, let's say. So on the basis of sex, you have divided. So one strata, it is males. So everyone within that subgroup will be male. So there is homogeneity within the subgroup in case of a stratified sample. But between groups, there is heterogeneity. Males and females, they are different. So homogeneity within subgroup, heterogeneity between subgroup in case of a stratified sampling method. But what about cluster sampling method? In a cluster sampling method, within a subgroup, see we have selected students here. So within the same subgroup, you can have male student, female student. There can be heterogeneity within a subgroup, but between subgroups, there is homogeneity. how it is homogeneity? They're all same clusters. You're dividing it into homogeneous groups, but within each of the subgroup there is difference, there is variation. So in cluster sampling, there is homogeneity between subgroups, but there is heterogeneity within subgroups. So this is the difference between cluster sampling and stratified sampling. Now, what is the advantage of going ahead with cluster sampling methods, and what are some of the limitations here? Now, one thing before we proceed to this, when we are going for studying a particular geographical area using cluster sampling method, it is sometimes referred to as area sampling. So keep this in mind. So what are the advantages and what are the disadvantages? Advantages of cluster sampling method. Now, it is easier to apply when we are trying to study large populations distributed across geographies. Cost is also comparatively less. In this scenario, in case some respondents are not willing to give information or they don't want to be part of the methods, social research, in that case, you can easily substitute the respondents. So there is some sort of flexibility here. You can also estimate the characteristics of different clusters from your research. It is also easier to administrate these kind of methods. You do not require to identify each and every individual. Can be used when it is inconvenient or unethical to randomly select individuals. We are not going for random selection here. So it is a better method over different kinds of random methods. But disadvantages are also there. Cluster sizes might not be the same. For example, here, the example that I showed you, the illustration that I showed you, we are basically taking initially to the clusters as states. But each state is not the same. The size of the states are not the same. Then the next secondary sampling units here. Each of the cities, towns, they are also not same in size. So again, if they are not same in size, the question of representativeness is also there. So that is again another challenge here. The difference between cluster sampling and stratified sampling, we have already discussed. When it comes to stratified sampling, there is homogeneity within groups and heterogeneity between groups. When it comes to cluster sampling, there is heterogeneity within subgroups, but there is homogeneity between subgroups. So that is something which is important and which differentiates the cluster sampling and stratified sampling. So this is about cluster sampling method. Now again, cluster sampling method can be of different types. One type is multi-state sampling. So sampling is taking place at different stages. Just the example that we saw. First, you are creating clusters of states. Then you are creating clusters of cities and towns. So you are going through multiple stages. The sampling process involves multiple stages. But finally, at the end of the day, you are studying the final samples. The last sample is studied. The students within the school. That is the last sample that we are going to study. So sampling is selected through various stages, but only the last sample is studied. This method is called multi-stage sampling method. But in case you are studying the samples at each and every stage, then it is called multi-phase sampling. Process is same as multi-stage, but here each sample is adequately studied before another sample is drawn from it. So in that case, first you will study the sample at the level of state, then you will study the sample at the level of cities, towns, counties. You will study the sample at the level of schools. Then you will look at the sample that you have created using the students. So at each level, you are studying the samples before proceeding to the next stage. So this is called multi-phase sampling method. In multi-stage, only final sample taken. In multi-phase, all the samples are researched. Now, what is the advantage of going for a multi-phase sampling method? Now, since you are studying the samples at all the phases, it helps the researcher choose a more relevant and more representative sample. So that is the reason multi-phase sampling is carried out. But yes, so it will be more time consuming. Also, it will be a more expensive method. More efforts are required in this process, but it might be more representative as a sample. So that is the advantage here. So this is about multi-phase sampling method. And with this, we come to an end of all the probability sampling methods. Probability sampling methods where each and every unit, each and every element has equal chance of being part of the sampling. Now we will discuss about the different non-probability sampling methods. Here each and every unit does not have equal chance of being part of the sampling. So we'll start with the different methods of non-probability sampling. First method that we'll take up is convenience sampling. Now in this method, how a particular respondent is chosen, how the sample is chosen. Now this method is also called accidental or haphazard sampling. Now the researcher studies those elements who are most conveniently available, or who he might accidentally come in contact during the period of research. For example, many of these studies related to election are like this. The researcher might move around and he might meet someone and will ask, what is your opinion about this particular candidate? Whether this person is stand to lose or whether this person is stand to gain? What is the reason why he is stand to lose, why he is stand to gain? So many of the election studies are like this. Convenience sampling. Whoever is convenient to approach or whoever you are meeting accidentally, you are asking them or you are taking their feedback. So convenience sampling. What is the advantage? What is the disadvantage here? The advantage is a quick method. It is a convenient method. It is economical. Best for exploratory research, not for explanatory or descriptive research. For exploratory research, it's good. But there are some disadvantages as well. Now, whoever you have asked, that person might have had some vested interest. Sometimes the respondents who you would have asked, they might be those elements who are more vocal, those who want to brag a lot. So again, whatever data you are getting, it is not exactly representative of the population. So these are the disadvantages with convenience sampling. Another kind of sampling is purposive sampling. Now, this is also referred to as judgmental sampling. Researcher purposely chooses person who in his judgment are thought to be relevant to the research topic. Now, if you want to study, let's say, about a betting system, now you know that these are the areas where you can get the relevant details. These are the areas. So you will focus on those areas. You go to those areas where you know you find better and you will get the necessary details. So you purposely choose those persons who in your judgment are relevant. Another kind of non-probability sampling method is quota sampling. Now, quota sampling is also more or less similar to stratified sampling. Here, a quota is fixed by the researcher. For example, let's say you have to study 250 students spread across, let's say, 5 colleges. This is the total population that needs to be studied. Let's say you have to make a sample of 50 students out of these 250 students spread across 5 colleges. Now, a quota will be fixed by the researcher that from each of these 5 colleges, study 10 students. And each of these 10 should have 5 males, 5 females. So the researcher has decided the quota. But the person who is going to carry out the interview, that person can decide who will be those 5 males, who will be the 5 females in each of these colleges. So that is the difference between stratified sampling and quota sampling. There is a discretion on the part of the interviewer. Researcher fixes the quota, interviewer decides who are going to be the respondents. So this is quota sampling. What is advantage and what is disadvantage? Now, this method is also not a very expensive method, less costly, does not require these sampling frames, relatively effective, less time consuming. But it is also not very representative. Here, the interviewer is deciding. There can be bias on the side of the interviewer. And the researcher is also not having a fixed control, strict control over the research work. A lot of times, interviewer might have control. He or she might have the bias here. So this is called quota sampling method. Snowball sampling. What is the meaning of snowball sampling? Now, here, researcher begins the research with few correspondents who are known, who are available. Now, these respondents, they give other names who meet the criteria of the research. Now, these new names will give some more names, and the process continues till adequate number of persons are interviewed. So, you know this particular individual, you know the particular characteristic of this individual, and this person is relevant for the researcher. So, the researcher will go and ask this person. Now, this person may direct the researcher to someone else. This person will again direct the researcher to someone else. These all people are relevant to the research topic. So, from one person to other, the researcher gets directed, keeps on interviewing the process of interview till sufficient amount of data is collected, till research is done. Now, this particular method has its own advantages. This particular method can be used in certain scenarios, some specific scenarios. For example, in some cases, what happens, it's very difficult to identify, or it's very difficult to identify your members of the sampling unit. For example, sometimes you don't want to part with certain information. If you, let's say, you want to study about drug rates, how will you identify the drug rates? Maybe you will get hold of one drug rate. That person might tell you about other drug rate. From this particular person, you can move to some other person, from that drug rate to another drug rate. But if you want to study, let's say, domestic violence, again, not everyone will not inform directly that this domestic violence happens here, but you might approach one person. That person can inform you about some other person who is also subject to domestic violence. That way, you can get relevant information. So, for these kind of research areas, research topics, snowball sampling is a good method. So, it is used when the target population is unknown or it is difficult to approach. These target survive meters, these kind of population. Sample size is not huge, and also this method is not very expensive. Disadvantages, see, one respondent is writing to another respondent. So, highly likely they will be known to each other, they will be more or less similar. So, if they are similar, again, your whatever data you have, whatever research you can go, might get biased. One kind of opinion you will get everywhere. So, that is the disadvantage with this method. Another method is volunteer sampling. Here, the respondent himself or herself volunteers to give information he holds. So, voluntarily information is obtained. So, this is again another type of non-probability sampling methods. So, these are the most prominently used non-probability sampling methods: convenience sampling, purposive sampling, quota sampling, snowball sampling, and volunteer sampling. Now, another dimension here: on what basis the size of the sample should be decided? We have now understood the different sampling methods, but how are you going to decide the size of the sample? What is the unit of the sample? What is the unit size of the sample? Now, one element is the size of the population. If the population is large, the sample size should also be accordingly large. Nature of the population, that also has an impact. Now, if the population is homogeneous in nature, then the sample size can be small. If the population is heterogeneous in nature, so you need to take into consideration the different strata, the elements along which heterogeneity is there. So, in such a scenario, the sample size might have to be large because it has to include all these relevant strata. Whether the study is qualitative or quantitative, that also impacts it. Now, whenever you are going for a qualitative study, you are not limited by these numerical boundaries. For example, the snowball method. Now, you keep on asking people till the amount of time you think your study is relevant. You have got the necessary amount of details. So, generally, whenever you are going for this qualitative kind of research, numerical boundaries are not that important. In quantitative, yes, numerical boundaries are relevant. Another important criteria is accessibility of elements. If you are able to access elements, it's fine. If you are not able to access the elements, then your sample size has to be small. It cannot be large beyond a particular limit. Cost of obtaining elements: if the cost is more, sample size will be less. How much amount of variability you want to include? If you are including the different strata, the different dimensions along which there is variation within the population, then the sample size is going to increase. If you are not willing to include the variability, the sample size will be less. How much accuracy you want? Generally, a large sample will be more accurate in nature. It will be more representative. So that also decides it. Larger the sample size, more will be the accuracy. Sampling error: minimum the sampling error, maximum is the representativeness. So that also needs to be taken into consideration. Apart from that, stratification: how many elements of stratification you are taking into consideration? How much stratified the society is? That will also have an impact on sample size. So this is about the factors which decide the size of the sample. Now, when you are creating a sample, when you are going ahead with the sampling method, there are possibility of bias creeping in. What are the reasons why there can be a bias? What factors leads to bias in your sample? First thing, if the researcher does not have much knowledge about the social setting of the research, does have very little amount of knowledge about the social setting of the research, there can be bias. In case the informants that you are asking questions, the respondents, they are not representative of the population. They do not represent the population, there can be bias. Sometimes the informants, they might not be typical. That means their opinion, their observations is not typical of the observation of their opinion, their observations is not typical of the entire population. So in that case, their opinion, their observations can mislead. So that can be a challenge. Sometimes respondents, they might not be willing to cooperate with you. They are not helpful, they are not cooperating. Sometimes the respondents you have got, the people you are asking questions, they might be activists of a particular group. So in that case, whatever answers you are getting, you are basically getting the answers from a particular community or group. You are not getting the other side of the opinion. So you are not getting different viewpoints. Sometimes you want to get some idea about a community, but the respondents that you are asking question to, they only marginally belong to that community. They do not actually represent the community. They are not fully into that community. So many of the practices beliefs of the community might not be reflected in them. Their belief practices might be different. So in that case also, you will not get the right information. Sometimes if you are just selecting informants on the basis of convenience, again there can be challenges. Also, the researcher sometimes might be prejudiced against certain type of person. So there might be some prejudice that can also impact your study. So biases can creep in because of all these factors. Now, another dimension here: when you are going for qualitative study, what are the factors that you are taking into consideration when you are choosing samples? If you are going for qualitative research, and what is the difference between qualitative research and quantitative research, or qualitative methods of sampling and quantitative methods of sampling? Now, when you are going for sampling for qualitative research, what you are trying to get? So, sampling in qualitative research is not directed towards large numbers. It tries to look for typical cases. Qualitative research not directed towards fixed samples, rather you would like to have flexible samples. You interview someone, and if you think that with that interview you have got sufficient 4 points for your research, it's fine. Or else you can interview someone else. So the samples keep on the sample size and the sample. It should be more flexible when it comes to qualitative research. Qualitative research is directed not towards random sampling but towards purposive sampling, judgmental sampling. Qualitative research not directed towards representativeness but towards suitability. What kind of candidates are suitable for them? Qualitative research is not directed towards choosing a sample before the study. Rather, it would choose the sample while the study is in progress. Snowballing method, for example, can directly fit here. not directed towards strictly defining the size beforehand. You're going for convenience, suitability. If more number of interviews are required, go for it. It is the sample size. It is not targeted towards mechanical sampling, but rather theoretical sampling. So, qualitative sampling is directed towards these things rather than these things. What is the difference in qualitative and quantitative sampling in one thing? So, what is the difference between qualitative and quantitative sampling? Quantitative sampling, it is generally large. Qualitative sampling, it is small. Quantitative sampling, it will employ statistics. It is on the basis of probability theory. The samples are determined statistically. All these things are not relevant in quantitative sampling. Sample size is fixed before you collect data. It is done at the time of data collection. The cost is more, the cost is low. Again, it is a more time-consuming method. Quantitative sampling, qualitative sampling is not that time-consuming. Quantitative sampling is more representative. Qualitative sampling might be less representative of the entire population. So this is the difference between qualitative and quantitative sampling. So keep this in mind. So try to link it with the first subtopic under research methods and analysis chapter, qualitative and quantitative methods. So with this, we come to an end of the discussion on sampling. So in this session, what is very important for us to understand is what is the meaning of sampling, why do we need sampling, what is the purpose of sampling, what is the reason of sampling, what is the advantage of sampling. We need to understand what are the different kinds of sampling methods, probability sampling methods and non-probability sampling methods. What is the difference between these two methods? Now, under probability methods, probability sampling methods, there are different sampling methods. Simple, random, stratified, cluster sampling, multi-stage, multi-phase, systematic. So how each of these sampling methods differ from one another, what are the positives, what are the negatives. Then we need to understand what are the non-probability sampling methods, why are they called non-probability sampling methods, and within that, again, there are different kinds of methods. Convenience, purposive, snowball, voluntary, quota sampling. So we need to understand each of these sampling methods, how they are different from one another. And the last part, on what basis the size of the sample is decided, what are the ways by which there can be a bias in the sampling, and what is the difference between qualitative and quantitative sampling methods. And qualitative sampling methods, what is its main target? And again, from that we can also understand what is the main target of quantitative sampling methods. So this is all about sampling. And this is not a very difficult chapter, it's quite easy to understand. Remember all the illustrations that I showed you. Try to find out more examples. I've already given you so many examples. In most of the sampling methods, we discuss the examples. Try to have more of these examples. That is very, that helps us understand things. And in examples, if you quote these examples, the person who's going to write it, you understand that you have a very good understanding of the topic. So this is about sampling. Thank you.